What is up, guys, and welcome to another Home Grow TV talk show and podcast. I want to start off right away by warning those who are freaked out by gear talk and grow equipment. If that is you, close this podcast right now. But if you're like myself and are really into the newest tech that is coming out for the home grower space, then stick around because you're really going to like this podcast. This week, we sit down with Chris from Pulse Grow. We take a deep dive into my garden and do a dashboard analysis where we actually sit down and nitpick the numbers and metrics in my garden from day to night. Soil dryback, VPD, and we cover everything when it comes to garden metrics, deep down live and what's going on in my garden. We get a brief history as well from Pulse itself and get to discuss some things that Chris has never had the chance to share before on an open platform. Chris from Pulse Grow was also kind enough to do a giveaway on this podcast. Meaning in 14 days time from the posting of this video, someone in the comments section is going to win a brand new Pulse Pro. All you guys got to do to participate in the giveaway is comment down below why it is that you would want to test something from Pulse Grow, how it could maybe help your grow, or why it's got you excited. Anyone watching this can also try Pulse risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Check out their website and use code HomeGrowTV at checkout to get a discount and help support the channel in the meantime. I appreciate everyone who's been using that code, and it's also worth noting that right now they got their Black Friday sale going down. Buy one, get one offers, and special deals on the Pulse Hub VWC kit, which is a personal favorite of mine. Kick back, relax, pour yourself up a nice coffee, and let's dive into the podcast. Chris, my man, thank you so much for coming out to the podcast, brother. How you doing?
Hey, appreciate you having me on. I'm doing great.
This is one I've definitely been looking forward to for a long time, ever since I got my hands on one of these quite a while ago. I wanted to get informed on it first, so I'm going to get my hands deep into the information. But one of the things that I'm very curious about, because I see your guys' company all the time, I see you guys all the time on Instagram, a lot of my grow bros have it, but I'm still not yet caught up to the story. So if you don't mind, do you mind starting with your backstory, the mystery of what is Pulse and kind of what got you into creating this solution?
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to kind of dive into it and give some backstory. I mean, there's a lot of kind of like misinformation out there. A lot of people think, we're kind of this big company, very corporate, when that's really just not the case. And just to start it off, I mean, the story really starts with my cultivation journey. Personally, which dates back all the way to 2011. To make a long story short, I got one of the most fire ounces I'd ever picked up in my life. There were 10 seeds in there. I had never really considered growing before, but I wasn't going to pass up on that opportunity. And I just kind of popped some seeds, just not thinking too much about it. And the rest was history. I was immediately infatuated with the plant, specifically its genetic diversity. I thought it was just such an interesting plant from the perspective of, it's got males and females. It can replicate, the terpene profiles of other, things in nature, which not a lot of other plants can do, and became very fascinated with just how unique of a plant it was. And it didn't take me long to become completely obsessed. And, after a year or so, I thought it was big time type of deal. And I started scaling up, and I started to experience some of the challenges that, Pulse presents today, which is, common stuff that whether you're in a 2x4 tent or it's a multi-million-dollar facility, the challenges are kind of the same. But now you got to think that was back in 2013 when smartphones barely existed. At the time, I was working in kind of enterprise technology with, cultivation as my kind of second job at that point, which drove a lot of paranoia in me, right? Not only about my crop, but my job and, everything that can go wrong in a grow, especially when you're doing it kind of bare bones. And how everyone starts off. They start off small. They're like, oh, dabble into this, and then it goes deeper and deeper. And then you end up kind of like with this big project, as you very well know. And that's kind of how we got started. And my cultivation journey got started. And then that went on for a few more years where I just struggled with challenges in the grow, equipment failures, things like that, just the kind of common stuff. And around the same time, Internet of Things, connected technologies were starting to take off, and that's when I just kind of had a light bulb moment. I said, I need something to watch my grow while I'm at work, period. Like I love the plants too much. I can't afford a crop loss or anything like that. So that's really where the idea was incepted. And a few years later, I was talking to Peter about it, who's the technical co-founder of Pulse, and it was, we kind of just we were bored at our corporate jobs, and we wanted to do something we loved, and that's really kind of where we stand today. It's gone from protecting my garden to protecting gardens in over 50 countries. So our kind of mission has really grown as Pulse has grown. And it's really just been a really grassroots operation. We started with nothing. We have no outside investors. We bootstrapped everything, prototyped everything in our own personal gardens, and today we have over 30,000 sensors across the world in 50 countries, and the stakes are a lot higher, essentially, right? We're protecting a lot of caregivers out there, particularly in areas that are don't have as nice laws as in the States, or for instance in Colombia now. So it's an important thing for us to keep our services online and keep visibility into those gardens.
That's unreal. So was there like a specific line in the sand moment when you were like a grower at the beginning, and like was there a certain moment where you're like, I need to create a solution for this? Like, did you lose a crop, or was it just kind of in general you wanted to see it from work?
I was just obsessed with my garden. I would go in there many, many times a day, trying all different types of growing, DWC, soil. I wanted to suss out everything that I read online. I wanted to see what worked for me. The proof was in the pudding, so on. So I was messing with all sorts of things. And for me, it was originally just like, I wanted to, did I turn that fan off? Did I, like, when I went and laid down in bed, it's like, oh, did I turn that fan back on? It's like, oh God, I got to go back in there, unseal the space, this and that, just the common stuff, right? Or when I'm in, so originally it was kind of the paranoia aspect that was really driving me to seek out a solution myself. And that's what I was doing. I was looking around. I said, oh, well, looking here, looking there, like trying to find something that fit what I was looking for. Not necessarily an all-in-one control system, which, it's kind of cumbersome to get up. What I really wanted was visibility into the garden, and that's where I was finding not anything. And I was like, okay, well, there's something here. And then what really kind of just like the real light bulb moment, and I call the two pillars of value for Pulse. One side of it is the alerting and crop loss prevention. The other side is the optimization side. Once we had that first Pulse prototype made and I put it in my grow for 24 hours, I had that same moment that you had the first time you put a pro into your grow. You were just like, boom, the data tells a story. There's a lot, of insights to be extrapolated from, the particularities in my grow space, which everyone's is unique. But there is a lot of data that, just looking at the data, which we're going to do, I'm going to take a look at yours and see what I can kind of figure out, because I've read a lot of dashboards. We'll do a little bit of a dashboard audit on your setup, because you've got a lot going on with all your tents. Once I saw that data, I was like, wow, I've never seen my grow this way. This tells a very clear story, a higher resolution than what I'm used to using, which is just spot checking on the wall. Right, and then we really realized, like, oh, this is an optimization tool as well, and the rest was history. And then we had a vision, and we're continuing to deliver on it today. We started out with kind of our entry level all-in-one sensors, and now with the addition of the hub, we have really kind of built out the entire suite, so you can get any data point that you want.
Another question before we get into the audit, because the dashboard audit is definitely something that has me really excited, slightly nervous, I'm not going to lie to you, because I know we might discover on some things that definitely need to be optimized or that have not been done 100%. For those that are watching on YouTube right now or have seen the series of Battle of the Blueberries, you would have seen that we definitely over-dried our last crop. And now we can actually tell that and show that. And so before we get into the dashboard audit and look at some of the grow rooms and some of the analytics, I just had another question on that. So your guys' my assumption was when I first seen Pulse, I was like, amazing, your guys' education is so good, the website's beautiful, the products are awesome. I did really assume that you guys were a large team and there was a ton of like scientists over there working on this thing. How big is your team in reality?
In reality, we're super small. We've got about 6 employees, myself and Pete, a few engineers, and then ops. So we're lean and mean, and really that keeps the hierarchy out of the game, right? When users come to us with good ideas for the app, that type of stuff gets put in rather quickly if it is a really good idea. And yeah, it keeps us true to what we're doing. We don't have a bunch of investors breathing down our neck. We try to stay pro-consumer instead of anti-consumer, like so many of the hydroponic manufacturers are. Me being a grower myself, I've dealt with these challenges with the hydroponic manufacturers. Everyone talks a big game about support and warranties and how great their product is, but little do you know, a lot of it just is coming from overseas. It's not well supported. You know, it's not what they're selling. And you know, having experienced that for 10 or 15 years, when we started Pulse, I said, we're not going to be that. We're going to actually, make a name for ourselves by being the exact opposite. And that's why we make everything in the United States, which is super rare for electronics and costly, by the way. But we also, we have 9 to 5 U.S.-based support. You know, John's on the phones taking care of any issues that come up. You know, we have a warranty policy, but we're super flexible on it. Keeping grows online is kind of our number one priority, and we do whatever we need to take care of our customers. It's the worst experience ever when you think you have faith in a brand and then you call them up experiencing a problem and they're like, oh, well, this isn't technically covered or whatever, even though you used it the way you should be using it. And, so we never want our customers to experience that type of thing. And, that's kind of the advantage of the way we're set up as a company, is that we don't have a big parent company that's, telling us what to do. We're doing what's right for the growers, and that's the way that we like it.
Yeah, you said something that I really, really liked, and I can imagine with such a small team and starting so ground floor and getting to the point you guys are, as a lot of the changes and things that you guys implement, is that coming from the growers themselves? And like as you guys are launching products, is it coming from the feedback?
100%. I mean, everything that we do. I mean, when we started this, I was, I would say a small cottage grower. I had a 10 by 20 room, so I was familiar with some of the challenges that you would experience in a large setup, but I was nowhere near the level of grows that Pulse services today, which are multi-state operators and so on. So a lot of the software apps and features and functionality, all of that stuff is driven by consumer demand. On the Pulse community, we have a forum where you can go and make your submissions, and it's very Reddit style. They can be upvoted, and that's every quarter we prioritize our roadmap, and it's strictly based off of we don't want to build anything that people don't want to use, which is what we find a lot in this space, technology in the grows specifically. A lot of other solutions have been repurposed essentially from other industries, and they're not a perfect fit because the engineers that engineered them weren't engineering for this use case. And, the ones that are working on it now may not be so familiar with growing either. So it's not as intuitive.
Right.
Whereas Pulse, we genuinely made it from the ground up. From concept to prototype to production, it was all around the garden. That's the only place that we ever tested it. We're grow rooms, just indoor cultivation areas. So
that's really cool.
It's been such a journey. I mean, and it's been awesome because now I get to go to some of the most state-of-the-art facilities you could possibly imagine, and I'm like still starstruck, even though I've been to so many of them now. It's like always very cool to see just the different styles, and everyone's got their own methodologies and superstitions. It's such a unique industry in its infancy, right? This is the first time any of us have ever got to, relatively first time that everyone's got to talk about it out loud like this, as the industry is starting to become more, socially acceptable or whatever it is in your country. And it's just such a unique experience to be a part of that we couldn't pass up on the opportunity. And not to mention, I love consuming, I love growing the plant. It felt right to actually do something we loved instead of, big corporate stuff, which is boring.
Yeah. And it makes me feel better too, man. I can't tell you the amount of messages I got from growers that I respected. Not like, again, I love everyone from the community, and we're all at different phases in our grow, and we have people that are joining brand new and doing their first grow right now that might be listening to this. But I had quite a few growers that have been doing this for years on years, and good friends even back from Canada that this is their livelihood, this is what they live behind. And I got the congratulation thumbs up from these guys. I'm like, heck yeah, man, you're hopping into the metrics and stuff. So that was a really cool sign for me in that sense. And now I'd love to transition into this dashboard, because you guys have me blown away from what you've done. It's not just a phone app, which kind of got me at the beginning. I was like, right on, you get to see it from your phone. I get to monitor from anywhere from my phone. But the amount that I use the desktop version is actually quite surprising. because it's just so bam, like right to the point. It's so functional. It's so diverse and so robust. So let's pull that up and go through a little dashboard audit as I kind of sit on the edge of my seat over here. Again, a little bit nervous about some of the findings that you might pull up here.
Homework review. Let's see how we've done here.
Before we even get into this, is this something that you've done before with other growers, or something that you kind of do in your pastime, or how does this work?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so many of these that I'm the guy that goes in there once a big install is done and tries to show the customer things that, anomalies and things that they should be looking for within their data. So we'll start with some of the basic stuff that I just look for, normally, and then I'll take a look, a bit closer look at the data and see if I can see any weird stuff, or just point out things like, oh, look, we've got consistency here, we've got inconsistency here, what happened here, and so on. So
perfect. And anyone watching this again on YouTube as well, I encourage you guys to be able to go through this same type of audit that we're about to do here. And I'll make sure Chris kind of takes us from a ground zero, what we're even looking at, all the way to diving into some of the specific analytics and some of the findings. But I encourage you guys to do the same thing from your guys' end, whatever tool you may have. Even if you do not have a pulse, there's a way to calculate certain pieces of data and try and follow along as much as you guys can. But I'll let you take it away from here, Chris.
Cool. So here we got the HomeGrow TV facility. You've got a lot, you've got a lot going on here. Everyone's familiar with the few tent setups that you've got. Right now we're running a combination of hubs and pros in this space, I believe. So let's just kind of take a look at some of these tents. Each one of these boxes here, as you see, that are labeled, are any individual grow space. The sensors within those grow spaces are, if they are the same type, averaged together, so you get a kind of single pane of glass view of anything going on within that space, which can be a tent, a room, a whole house, whatever it might be. And then we can click in here and then take a look at some of the data specifically. We'll start off with some of the stuff that I typically look for, day to night, temperature swings, any kind of anomalies in the data, and then we'll take a look at kind of your specific space and see if there's anything interesting that we can pull out. Let's start with the 2x4 here, and
awesome. As
you can see, we've got the Uvaz black tuna in there. Is that right?
Yeah, that one's that's a 4x4, yeah, and that's got the Uvaz black tuna, and it's like a grapey. It's coming out grapey gas right now, and this what I love about this. Now I know what day and week we're in. We're day 34, week 5.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even count the amount of times that I've been counting on a calendar and had to restart counting because you get to 50 or whatever and get distracted. So this has been a handy tool for us. So week 5, we're getting in there. Must be getting aromatic in there. So when we click into the zone here, we can see all the individual sensors.
I'm liking what I'm seeing in there so far.
Yeah, I bet. So here now we're inside the 4x4 zone that's got the black tuna in it. And on this page, pretty much we're seeing an overview of all the sensors within that zone. On the top, we've got the VWC, which is your soil moisture readings. Pretty much what you're seeing on this graph here is a week's worth of data that is just showing your dryback patterns throughout the week. And let me cancel some of this. We'll take away the temperature and the humidity, and we'll see the important stuff. You've got the blue lines here, which is your water content, and you've got the yellow line here, which is your PWEC, your pore water EC, which is your agriculturally relevant EC reading for soil. And then you've got, what you see, what your dryback patterns are here. Obviously, the blue line goes up. That's at the beginning of your day, it looks like. And interestingly, you can, if you look down to the pro data, you can line that up directly with the start of your day, which is down here. The lights came on.
Right.
We got our first shot for the day, which I believe you're growing in soil, correct?
Yep. It's like cocoa soil mixed with, it's cocoa hummus, basically. Or cocoa castings. So,
you got your early morning watering, kind of fluctuates a little bit as it levels out, as the moisture wicks into the medium. And then you've got your typical dryback throughout the day. Boom. And then it kind of tapers off here, which without even seeing the light data, we can tell that this is nighttime, right? The plants aren't drinking. This stabilizes out, but equally, because you got the pro in there and you look straight down, boom, easily lights off. And you've just got the same pattern going every day.
Right.
I'd be curious to know what was happening around this time. As you can see, things were a little different than. So you may have been working in the room. I don't know if you left the lights on a little longer, but that would be something that I take a look at as to why the pattern kind of tapers off right here. But it looks like right around after your lights went off. So it may have just been the plants finishing up their drinking.
This is what I really loved about the Pulse, and I was excited with this conversation because every tool that I've installed has brought me to a new learning curve, like diving in on nights, like late nights of learning dry back, right? And because of this VWC, I remember when I first installed it, and I sent you a question. I was like, what should my rates be at? And you brought something up about dry back, and I was like, oh my God, man, I don't even know what that is. So I'm going to dive deep into my research and start looking at dry back and what they should be. So until my point now that I've been using it over, quite a few months, I've kind of gotten a balance for what my dry back looks like. As you can see, we pretty much feed daily unless I turn it on the next day and I see there's still some humidity in there. So for those who don't know what dry back is and for what the numbers you're seeing here, how does this look on the dry back and why is that something important to be monitoring?
That's a great question, and thanks for bringing it back a step because it's super important and it's a question we get all the time. So from a high level, a dry back is just, a dry back cycle is essentially just how long it takes your plant from getting your medium from going from full saturation to the point where right about where your plant is going to be drooping or experiencing some stress due to lack of water. And people, when the question is asked, what's a good percentage to run? Percents are relative and all mediums are different. So this is something that you're going to have to kind of explore and figure out on your own based on your own growing style, your medium, what you find appropriate for you, your growing style and your plants. But the rule of thumb, and I think I shared this with you when we first got it, is as far as VWC drybacks is you want to saturate your pot as much as get your sensor installed, saturate your pot as much as possible so you see what that maximum water retention percentage is, which for you it seems like it's about 30% on the medium that you're using. So that's your top end. So, and now once you do your watering, that's kind of where it's going to be at. But what you're going to want to monitor and watch is let the plant dry, have the sensor installed, let it get fully saturated, and then let that dry back occur all the way down to the point where you're about to see droop, right? And that's pretty much going to be your range of acceptable VWC levels. If it gets down to, let's say, you're down to 21 here, or even lower down to 20, say maybe you start seeing drooping at 18, then your acceptable ranges are 30% to maybe 19 or 20, because you don't really want to hit that droop point. That's when the plant's going to experience stress, and that's not necessarily what you want. But what you do want to do, and why drybacks are important, is that you want to increase your number of wet-dry cycles. And a lot of the listeners have probably heard this before. You want to have a lot of wet-dry cycles. And that really comes back to just the psychology of the plant. And this is something that I really like. It's like, well, why does that matter? It's like, well, what happens in nature and what's occurring? And in this case, if you've got, medium that's saturated all the time, it's not going to be oxygenated, which the roots love oxygen. But B, you're not going to be promoting generative growth, which is pretty much you want to tell the plant that during veg, not during bloom, during veg, that it's got work to do. If you've got it saturated in water all the time, the roots aren't motivated to go stretch out and create an extensive network. The plant's saying, hey, we've got water all the time. We don't need to we don't need to build up a root mass. We've got water all the time. Not only is it not oxygenated, doesn't like those conditions, but it's also you're not tricking the plant into being more productive. And that's really what increasing your drybacks, and that's the guys running Rockwell, they'll do 6 drybacks a day, and that's because they're building that root mass up constantly, which is really important when you get into the flower phase. Wow. Because really you're not growing, you're growing roots so that you can support big buds, and that's why drybacks are so important. Yeah. And the concept of that is a little bit lost in the sense that why do you need to do that? Well, you don't want to spoil the plant necessarily when it comes to water, because you want it be motivated to develop a very, healthy root mass during the veg state. So that's at its, at a very simplistic explanation. That's why drybacks are important. You're motivating the plant to grow more root mass.
Right. Yeah, and I can definitely say this changed just seeing this data over a long period of time is what got me onto the daily feeds now nonstop, because I could see when that dryback was happening. And I think what I was doing before I was really monitoring what was happening in my soil as far as, the humidity and how much water content there is I think I was overwatering. So what I would do before, we would actually feed quite a bit, water quite a bit, and then probably not feed for another 2 days, maybe even 3 sometimes. And so I would imagine back then my drybacks were probably much slower, or, I was probably overwatering is what it was. And now I kind of know, like, if we look down at the light sensor from October 23rd time, which I think was yesterday, or from the day yesterday, you can see the light goes down a little bit. I was out of the house and I checked on the pulse. I was like, okay, dude, I'm already at like 20%. It's getting pretty dry, so I'm going to turn the lights down right now until I get home to hit them with water. And so I've gotten in this daily habit now of feeding because of what I've been seeing from the drybacks. And now you nailed it. Yeah, 18%. And I can't wait till we get to the jelly donuts section, that garden, because that one drinks so much quicker, I noticed. And these ones are in 3 gallons. For some reason, they're not drinking as much, and they'll get, maybe about 5% of that water content a day. But it's already, I've learned a lot from drybacks from when I first installed it.
And there's actually, when you talk about percentages in drybacks and container size, there are actually some really cool calculations that you can literally, they're precise enough and the sensors are good enough to say, hey, I want to increase my VWC percentage by 5%. This is the container size that I have. How much water do I need to add? So there are shot calculations that can be applied to this if you really want to get technical with it. And while I'm just teasing that now because we have a whole VWC guide coming out Peter's been preparing that really does a deep dive on this topic, and I think it's going to be super valuable. But even, taking it back to kind of the home grower level, I get this question a lot. It's like, how do I get value from this as, a guy who's just got 1 tent or so that doesn't have it,
right.
That's hand watering, for instance, right? And it's like, for one, you got your bases covered in terms of you're monitoring exactly what's going on. You've got visibility in the alerts. But now instead of playing the guessing game, you know exactly when you need to water. You're not having that overwatering, potentially causing root rot. You're not guessing. It's more precise. And it's also, when you're hand watering, I'm sure you come back to your plants and seen them, a little droopy or whatever. You can avoid that, stressor event that's going to have the, a negative effect on your yield and your 5 months of work. It's by simply just having a sensor that says, oh, when it hits 20%, send me an alarm. I know that's exactly when I need to water. Then you're never overwatering. You're never stressing out the plant. And right. you've kind of just got your bases covered without any needing for anything too sophisticated. You don't need solenoid valves. You don't need this, but you still need the birdie to tell you, say, hey, it's about that time. Don't forget about it.
So do you mind if I pick up with a question on the specifics? Like, I get water content, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can see the percentages, we know the dryback, but what specifically are we looking at when you see the poor water EC?
So when you look at the PWEC, essentially there's different calculations and different models that have been applied to reading the conductivity of water. And as an industry standard, PWEC is the agriculturally relevant EC reading. And that's, we put bulk on there because it is one of the sensors that we do. It is an EC sensor. Essentially, all EC readings are the same. It's just electronic conductivity.
Gotcha.
And there's different models that are applied, and a very widely accepted one is the Hillhurst model, which is what PWEC is calculated from. So essentially, it's a bit of a fancy math thing, but from a scientific agricultural perspective, that has been kind of the industry accepted model for understanding how conductive and how nutrient dense the water is.
Cool. And then on the Pulse Pro end, take us through a little bit on that. What we're seeing here on these graphs. And let's go ahead and dive into the numbers and what we're seeing below.
Cool. So, right below the VWC sensors, we've got the Pulse Pro readings. Looks like you only have one in this space. And honestly, you're fortunate. You've got your lung room set up, so your regulation it seems like it's quite stable here. Is what I'm seeing. So thumbs up on that. It seems like you got it kind of going on. I mean, look how flat these charts are. In a less optimized grow, you would see a lot of turbulence on this, particularly a tent, because small spaces are harder to regulate. But because you've got that lung room, you've got the advantage of that lung room. Okay. It seems, we were seeing a lot more stable readings than we would typically see in a tent. Because as as soon as that exhaust fan goes on to the tent, the entire atmosphere will change fairly quickly because of how fast the air turns over in a tent. But some of the stuff, just for viewers at home that may have a pulse, a lot of the things that we like to look at are right here. Let's drill into a day here. And just kind of see up close. Okay. I know you had mentioned, this is the event that you mentioned earlier. You saw that you were getting kind of dry up here, down below your 20%, which it seems like that's kind of your sweet spot where you found where it's a good time to water. So just to reiterate what you said earlier, Dakota saw that his plants were getting a little dry. He wasn't at home time to water, so he would just turn the lights down a little bit. You can see here they went from quite intense, and that yellow bar here is the intensity of the lights overlaid so that you can see it as a time almost. So he turned it down, and then right when he got home to water, boom, turned them right back up, right back to where they were needed to. So without shutting his whole operation down, made a small change that made it so that the plants didn't experience any stress. But typically what I'm looking at, and this is probably the number one most shocking thing to people, is how consistently high their nighttime humidity is once they put a pulse sensor in there. Because you think about it, when you're just looking at the hydrothermometers, typical ones on the wall, that just give you your single data point of high-low. And I was guilty of this for years, and then I got a sensor in there. I was like, oh, okay, well, it's actually very humid in there all the time. In my mind, what I had dismissed at my high humidity readings on my high-low chart on the wall-mounted ones was, oh, that was probably right when the lights went off. The DHU took a while to pick up on that, right? It was probably only like that for a minute, right? That's just usually not the case. And I was guilty of it as well. So one thing that I'm really looking for when I'm doing a dashboard audit of a facility is not only their day to night shift in terms of, what is the fluctuation there? As we know, the cannabis plant likes consistency when it comes to its environment. So in an indoor environment where we control all the variables, the key is to make that consistent. And usually the biggest inconsistency comes from that day to night shift and that night to on shift. And here, again, because you have that lung room, while we can see right here when the lights go off, we see a little bit of a shift, but it's only about a 3 degree swing down on the temp, which, Columbia, it's a little bit warmer than most places. We see some really drastic ones in some of the colder areas, which, is battled by heaters. And just to give an example, it's like, if we saw a 15 degree shift down here and you were in a cold area, if you were using a controlled heater or something like that to combat that, then it would take a while for that heater to kind of come on, start warming up the room, and then regain that stability. So by looking at this, you say, okay, well, it might take an hour or two for that heater to really get bumping up to capacity. Now we know we need to start running that heater ahead of time, because as soon as those lights go out, the temp's going to drop like a stone. So that's the type of stuff that, it's so case by case with the grows because of just the different circumstances and, environments and such. But once you start being able to recognize patterns in the data, such as that, then you can start taking the steps to preventing those things from happening, right? Oh, like if you can see that your nighttime humidity is 70% all night, see, you have a bit of a climb too. Right. Your lights are doing good, keeping the humidity down, or your dehumidifier as well. They go out, and they do a pretty good job of staying low. You probably have a DHU in the lung room and such, and then plus your AC. But as it kind of, as the night goes on, it starts creeping up there. And this is probably a good indicator early on, right? I think we say we were on week 3 of the black tuna, right? That's pretty early in flower. All right. I bet if we took a look at this in week 8, we would see a lot more drastic of a spike here, just because the plants are cutting off a lot more humidity. The buds are a lot denser, and the risk is a lot higher. So that would be, if I were watching this crop, as my own, I would start saying like, either I need to try to taper down this nighttime humidity, or I would, if I didn't have the ability to do that, I would do something like really increase the airflow. Interestingly, mold needs stagnant air specifically. And that's why airflow is so important in the grows. Is you can have a pretty humid environment without mold, but you need a lot of airflow. And a good example of this is a lot of the large high-tech facilities that we work in these days, in their veg rooms, they literally have misters that are going almost always. And the humidity is 85 to 90% in those rooms. And let me tell you, I don't like installing sensors in them. They're hot. It's like 85 to 90 degrees and 85 to 90 degrees humidity. It's insane. It's like, it's like a rainforest in there. But they're able to do it because they're moving so much air around that, there's not the opportunity for mold to kind of, it needs the stagnant wet air. It needs two things. It needs the dampness, and it needs, stagnant air, essentially. So if you are having problems late flower.
So what's the danger zone numbers? Would that be 70%?
It depends on the stage of growth, I would say. Yeah, in anything over 70%, if you've got full colas, week 8, you're taking it home. You had a great crop, you did great lollipopping, and you got really nice sticks going on. Anything over 70%, you're going to really be risking bud rot, especially on some of the chunkier strains that stack much harder than others.
Gotcha.
So again, it is situational, but I would definitely stay below 70 for sure. And as I mentioned, if you're if you don't have a DHUE or your situation doesn't allow for you one, like it's difficult to put a DHUE in a tent, So the best way to kind of prevent anything from happening the best way that you can is in my tents. What I'll do is I'll put a box fan at the bottom, laying down, and it shoots air down, and it just like creates like a plume of air. It's shooting air down, but it comes up all on the sidewalls, and it really keeps the air circulating in there. So anything you can do to increase the circulation is going to help. If you're really having a good crop, the worst thing that could possibly happen is you get bud rot and those awesome buds. So if you're in a situation where you are experiencing high humidities, then the box fan trick is definitely one that will work. Obviously, don't point it straight at the plants; they don't like that. But to create that kind of that plume effect, you point it at the floor, and it just in a small space like that, it'll be moving the air around plenty. Let's see. Let's take a look at one of the other zones before we move away from the data. See what else you got going on. Let's do the 10 by 10 room, because I took a look at this or the 5 by 10 tent. It's a little larger of an area.
Yes, nice. The jelly donuts up in here, and these drink much faster. Like sometimes I feel like, oh man, I gave them too much water today. The next day they're already at dry back at like 18%. I've even shocked myself, ready to feed that next day, and I'm like, oh my god, how are they dry already?
I had the same. When I was looking at the data earlier, I was trying to figure out which tents to look at. And I had the same kind of reaction. My first instinct was to look at what batch, like where they were at in their cycles, because I just automatically assumed. I said, oh, the jelly donuts are probably further along. They're drinking heavy, but that wasn't the case. So it seems like either. It could be genetically those are
they are bigger
those are
pots.
cracking.
So these are 5 gallons compared to the other tents with 3 gallons. Could that be it?
Mm-hmm. So I would think the inverse would happen. In the larger pots, the dry back would be slower. Okay. I would imagine, right? And that's also something that came to my mind. So it seems like these guys, the jelly donuts genetics are slapping pretty hard.
Yeah, they're slapping hard, and maybe I'm not watering enough. That could be it as well. But let's see what we find here.
Yeah. So let's see. So you got the right and the left here. Let me turn off some of the other ones so we can drill into what we're looking at here. Okay. Yeah, so were these started from seeds or clones?
From seed. So 20 different phenos. 20 different seeds in there.
20 different phenos, okay. Because, the two that you have connected, the right and the left, How did you select them?
I wanted to go for like what you recommended, pick one of maybe your fastest drinkers, one of the slowest drinkers. But what I did was pick like the fastest drinker on the left side and the fastest on the right side. They're kind of in the middle, so I know they're like my fast drinkers. And maybe totally correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of what I went for.
Cool. No, and that's definitely a good way to do it. And it shows in the data here. Look how close these lines are together. And it also kind of shows the sensor's accuracy. They're within 1% on the water content volume. So they are,
right.
For one, uniformly drinking, which is a great sign. And, everything as far as that I can see in terms of actually the sensor installation and the consistency of data that's coming from it is looking very good. But yeah, they do have a bit of a slower dry back, and it would definitely be because of that larger pot. But again, you've got your right and left sides here, which you're able to see. Those are the THV probes. Looks like pretty uniform in here. Maybe your left. Oh, no, they're pretty uniform. So overall, not a lot to nitpick, honestly, because you've got this set up pretty well. Typically, you wouldn't see such consistency, and that's where we would start digging in, particularly in like a multi-tier facility. For instance, you've got tops and bottoms where heat obviously rises. You typically see hotter temps up top. Those would be the type of things that we're looking for. In a room, for instance, equipment that's near dehumidifiers and things like that. You can really see by creating a grid with the sensors, really see what that equipment affects that area of doing. And pretty much what we suggest is if you've got a larger room, typically you have areas that perform better than others, and sometimes you just don't know why. So that's usually where you would install your sensors, collect data in the good spots, collect data in the bad spots, and compare that data. And this is going to be situational for every grow, but that's the gist, right? You figure out where things are going well, and you try to replicate that everywhere else. But if you don't have that visibility in the first place, you don't know what you're shooting towards in the end.
Again, with the VWCs, it really helped me. Like, I think maybe it's in the middle of this week almost we're looking at, or maybe it was a bit before, but I noticed there was a few days on that dry back. It was so quick they were dry the next day, and that's when we decided we got to start feeding them more or watering a little bit more, because that's when the Grow Bro Brian was handling them during the week, and I could see a few of those days were just less. I was like, dude, are you giving them enough water? He's like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, well, and then I pulled up the graph. I showed it to him. I'm like, well, we can see here, bro, like, look how much it was when I was watering them, and then now look where this is you, right? And it's back to me, and we could kind of see, and he's like, okay, I got you. Let's increment it then by another half liter or whatever it was.
Definitely. And just a point towards, on the note of soil, when you do have a complete dry out event, because you didn't water or irrigation didn't come on or whatever it is, the soil will be extremely hydrophobic. So when you are doing your waterings, make sure to just give them a little bit of water. If they're very dry, just give them a little bit of water so that you can it kind of wicks through the medium and it's not completely dry. Because when it's completely dry, it's hydrophobic, and that's why if it's completely dry and you dump a bunch of water, you usually see it come out the bottom, which is a waste of nutrients and your time and such. So if you do have a complete dry out event, just give them a dash of water, let that kind of soak in, and then you do your heavy feed.
And do you think I'm making the correct move by turning the lights down? If I see something maybe already getting to that droop phase, I turn the lights down for the first few hours as I'm watering, as they kind of soak up? Or I've heard people say, like, you're going to shock your plants more by doing that, just by turning it down and then back up. What's your opinion on that?
Absolutely not. I mean, plants are used to fluctuating in lighting, not so much temperature. The outside temperatures don't change that drastically, that quickly. But there are clouds, there are, less bright days. So as far as lighting, I think it was a smart move. It's a smart move. They're going to really feel being dried out. That's going to be your number one stressor right there. It's the fastest way to stress out your plants and do the most damage is letting them get dried out. Whereas with the lighting, that is usually a lot more variable, and they're used to that type of thing. So that is a good move.
Gotcha.
And lucky you have the ability to do that as well.
Yeah, no, and you're right though. When someone said that to me, I was like, but what about the clouds and when the outdoor plants? I was like, they're not getting 1,000 ppfd from morning at 6 a.m. till 6 at night. There's things are going to happen, rain's going to happen. So, but I didn't know, and that's why I just wanted to clear that up. So thank you for clearing that up.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it may be a little bit, but I wouldn't think that it would stress them out very much. Given it's not like going from freezing to or heated to freezing or so on.
Got you. Well, that's good news then on the jelly donuts that things are looking good in there. So we've seen a 4x4, we've seen the 5x10. The other ones that I have in the zones areas, and I do have some other questions I want to get through as well. So it's up to you if we wanted to dive into do a quick little dashboard audit on a 2x4, or maybe even the hang dry that I have going on as well, because I know that might not be optimal. So it's up to you if we want to look through the grapples, the toronjas, or the hang dry.
Yeah, let's take a look at the hang, because this is actually, it's not one that people think about often in terms of using pulse sensors. Right. But actually, the big facilities use them. Some facilities only use them for their drying areas. And as you probably know, the cure and the dry is often the most overlooked piece of the puzzle. It's also the fastest way to screw it all up at the very end. So which I'm guilty of 100%. Right. I have definitely lost a couple nice crops due to either drying out too much, letting it sit too long. I think my story is that the first time I let it get too dry because I was worried about mold, and then it ended up being very strawy, and then every other time after that I try to cut it close and try to bring it out wet, and then you have your other problem, which is mold. So let's see what you got going on here. It looks if it wasn't for the monitor in the last one, I wouldn't have known why we had the results that we did. We had low lab results coming back when I know they should have been higher. And then when we did the rosin extract, it was like the lowest failure that we've ever had on the channel, but I could go back to this and understand why. And before I've ever used this, I wouldn't have known. I would have just assumed it was the genetic. I would have just assumed, it's no good. And I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, well, no doubt. It was such high this or whatever. So I'll let you dive into how this one's going. Because again, I don't have a fully dedicated area, but the more I see this data, the more it's pushing me to maybe I really do need more controlled dry area. So what are you seeing on here? So what I'm seeing is, did you just recently harvest?
Yeah, so this would have been, I started the batch on here from the day I actually harvested. So it looks like it was just harvest, and that day I started the harvest cure batch on the hang dry. Okay. So about 9 days ago. 9 days ago. Yep, that's pretty much what we're seeing here. As we're not seeing the light levels, so you're not working in this dry area anymore. Is what I'm seeing here. And let's see. Right. Get rid of CO2. That's not relevant to drying. So nice and cool. A little bit most high. Of the day. Still pretty fluctuating more than most dry areas that I'm seeing. But I wouldn't say that's the end of the world, right? You think about how they used to dry cannabis out in the fields, or they still do in some places, just in sheds, laid out in full stick form. So I mean, it can handle some abuse, but when we're trying to go for the maximized cure, stabilizing this is going to help quite a bit. For some reason right here, it looks like your humidity went quite high. I don't know what was going on last Thursday in the grow areas, but last Thursday I might have had the electrician over. I think we were switching out some stuff, so maybe I had the dehumidifier off for a little bit or something like that. You
may have had some breakers off, which would do exactly that. The dehu and the AC wouldn't be running, and you'd see that kind of spike. Yeah, that was in the afternoon, maybe. So that's what we see there, and really on the small scale, it's just making sure that you're in the areas that you want, so you're not drying out too quickly, you're not drying out too slowly. For kind of larger facilities and such, they've got one of these probes in every one of their tubs, and they're really just tracking to the minute. As soon as these things start saying, this is quite dry in here for a curing. Is this a tent or
right? Well, that's the problem, because it's in the room where the toronjas and grapples are also running, so I got to keep the humidity low in there for the other tents while they're drying right beside. So it's not optimized by any means. And would this be too dry, and you think I'd be evaporating some of those terps? And would you recommend maybe I look at setting up a new area?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's too dry. It's just going to dry out a lot faster than what would be the ideal setup, which would be extending that dry as long as possible. It's kind of, some of the high times cup guys, what they'll do, they'll take the whole plant, they'll put it in a cardboard box and just hang it just like that, and it really retains that moisture for a long time, and that slow dry supposedly. And I'm not a scientist, I haven't done the studies on this, but that is the general knowledge is that extending that dry is going to get you a better flavor profile in the end.
Right.
So while this isn't going to end your day, I would be using this knowledge. Seeing that it's a bit drier than typically would be in a dry space, I would know that this probably isn't going to go for 10 days. This might go for 6 or 7 days, for instance.
Okay.
And that's how I would use it.
Got you. Maybe I look at moving this dry area into the lung room, like into the actual entrance area, might be better, and I'll take a look at that, I guess, after, because it is much slower in there, and that's the thing, that's the way I used to do it, and this is only my third run with this big dehumidifier, which puts out a lot of heat and really dries down the area quite a bit. So I think that's probably the next adjustment that I need to make with that new tool installed, the dehumidifier, is look for where I'm going to start to have a better dry area. Always
something. Yeah, I think we're good on the dashboard. I mean, you clearly, there was not a lot to nitpick here, honestly. I would usually have, especially in tent setups. I think the big learning for everyone at home here that has a tent setup is that utilize your lung room. That's how you really take control of your environment within your tents, is by taking control of the environment outside the tents. When you're using small confined spaces like that, definitely take advantage of your lung rooms and track it. Track what's going on in there. It's going to reflect exactly what goes on in the tent as well.
That's good. I feel fortunate now that we got this. I thought I was going to get grilled a little bit on some of the things like VPD, which I'm going to say that question towards the end, because again, you guys have been my introduction to so many new terms, dry back, really paying attention to VPD. I thought it was way more complicated than it really is, but one of the things I want to know, what is the future with this? Because the batches wasn't around when I first jumped into Pulse. So where are you guys taking it now? It feels so much more organized, the way I can see my days, the progress bar, and kind of go through. Fill me a little bit on some of the future plans with that rollout.
Cool. Yeah, so the vision's always been the same for us, and that's getting to the point where we're able to give you a very comprehensive batch report, and that's really where zones and batches we're moving in that direction. What was preventing us before was the lack of data points. Now that we have the hub, we can support any type of sensor. So now our batch reporting will be very comprehensive. And what a batch report will be is, as these, you've got your zones set up. Those zones are used for specific things, or switched to do specific things: veg, flower, dry. And as we're tracking all of this data, as your plant batches move through these areas, once that plant batch is done, what we'll be able to do is compile all that data and give you a really comprehensive report on exactly, a summary of what that plant batch has experienced throughout its lifetime, which to my knowledge hasn't really ever happened on a very scientific level. And while that sounds cool, why is it important? It's important because when you've got things like breeders that are trying to bring out certain properties and certain strains, this will become a template for breeders and people that create genetics. When they give you a picture of a bud, right? And they're like, oh, you could grow this with my genetics. And oftentimes the customers will come back and say, hey, we didn't get that result, right? Well, you didn't. It's because they didn't have any guidance and such. So we want to arm not only breeders but facilities that are trying to do more with their own specific phenos and strains, is give them the information that they need to make those type of decisions. We run the same strain all the time. Is it better to run it warmer or cooler? We can guess about those type of things, but until you actually have a document, which is a batch report, that tells you during veg the daytime temperature was this, during flower the daytime temperature is this, P1, P2, P3 in flower. Once you get that kind of summary, now you've got an actual template that you can use. Okay, now you're able to correlate weight with the actual environment. Right. And that's really, whether you're a breeder trying to help your customers be successful, whether you're a big facility trying to maximize that top 5% out of that strain, or whether you're just a home grower trying to grow the best medicine for yourself. you need a way to metric that, and that's what the batch report will be. It'll be a very comprehensive report on exactly what that plant experienced and what the outcome of it was. Was it a good yield? Was it a bad yield? And that way you can actually start correlating some of this data to make it useful. And that's always been the end game, and with the hub, it's just like really opened the doors for some really scientific stuff, and some of the projects that we have going with breeders and some of the big facilities that are, batch reporting's not in the software yet, but we are collecting the data, and we'll be kind of showcasing that in the next couple months or so.
Right. Oh my God. I'm just imagining me as a grower, like whoever won the Cannabis Cup, that's coming up over here. And it's just like, okay, there's a strain, like, wow, how did they do it? Like to get to see that insight from their grow would be so helpful to myself. And then that is a really good point, actually, when you see it, because you do hear that a lot. Oh, my blueberries didn't turn out that way, or, my Runsotopia didn't turn out the same. Well, if we could actually dive into the numbers, or if I could, as Homegrow TV, show you exactly what I hit, the good, the bad, the right, and the wrong, I think that would be very helpful. And it definitely opens up my eyes to where you guys are going on that.
For sure. And, we've always been really in tune with the community and trying to support the guys that really make it happen. And a lot of that comes from the breeders who've been pushing the limits for years. I as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a breeder, and until I found out how difficult it was. You need a lot of space, you need a lot of plants, and you need a lot of patience to really get, the kind of selection that you want to be, reproducing. If you're doing it correctly.
Right.
And so it gives you more of a, instead of just sending them out there with a pack of seeds, it says, hey, you can use this as a template of what you should be shooting for. And we've got all sorts of cool stuff that we'll be working with as these batch reports, become available. You'll be able to do stuff like select what strain you're running, and then pick, if the breeder has a batch report available, you'll be able to pull that up and overlay it on your data to see how far off and what are the differences based on we know what a good outcome comes from, and it's this set of stats. You can overlay it with your actual data and say, okay, this is the difference here, and that's what we're chasing in terms of improvements to the environment.
Right. Yeah, and I bet, right, like that difference between, from really good to superb Cannabis Cup winning bud might just be a few little changes, and that little overlay in my dashboard might be, where I'm like, okay, this is where I got to just stabilize this or get to this. So it does lead me to, like, who is Pulse ultimately for then? Is it for the home growers? Is it for the breeders, or for the commercial?
That's a tricky question, and when you look at our actual customers, I'd say it's pretty close to 50-50 in terms of how many sensors are out there. And we design for the consumer. Our price point is affordable. You can buy our equipment. I think that's an important one. A lot of places, for this type of thing, you need a consultant that comes in and does all this stuff. It's 2023.
Yeah.
You don't need a consultant to get a connected hardware in your grow. So, it's simple and accessible enough for the home grower, but it's also got the powerful feature set in the Pulse Plus features that are going to accommodate for the commercial growers. That has team management and access management, and the stuff big facilities are going to want. And that's philosophically, as a company, it's been kind of like, who do we cater to? And one thing that we will never do is like turn away from the home growers, because that's the bread and butter. They are the community. That is, the commercial. What's interesting is that we cater a bit to the commercial guys, do special stuff for them. But what ends up happening is those features end up coming down. To the home grow level, they don't have to pay the subscription for it like the commercial guys do, essentially, because it's only for one user or whatever. So while we do have that commercial side of things, pretty much it drives innovation for the masses in the home grow space. So it's kind of a tricky question, because on our surface it seems very consumer. But you would be surprised at the number of MSOs that have, billion-dollar building control systems. They still use Pulse as that secondary line of defense, because, when your controller does something wrong, it doesn't necessarily tell you. And when you've got, literal millions of dollars of crop under there, you always want that kind of canary in the mine to make sure, they're bottom line driven, and they don't want to lose any of it.
That was a vibe I got as a home grower, getting my hands into the software for the first time. It kind of felt like I had a little slice of what the commercial guys are getting to deal with, but in a way that was easily digestible, in a way that pushed me to learn more. And not only on the dry backs, on these things, one of the first things that got my mind racing on the first monitor that I got my hands on, the Pro, was CO2. So when I seen CO2, we actually did a test. It's going to be coming in one of the seed to harvest coming up soon. We tried one of the little T&B shakers, which we've done in the past, but I had no clue if it was doing anything. Well, we put one of these in there. We got to see the actual what was happening with this CO2. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to leak what happened yet. You're going to have to watch the episode for that. But I want to talk a little bit about the CO2 monitors you guys have in here. I have a feeling like this isn't just any regular little CO2 monitor. Like, this is something that I can actually trust. And could you dive a little bit more into your guys' CO2 monitors and what you have there? Because I'm thinking about diving into that world now.
Definitely. And I'm super excited to see the results of your test as well, because I have my questions about the effectiveness of those type of solutions or not. So I'm interested to see what is the final results on that. But when it comes down to CO2 sensors, there's kind of a lot more to them than most people think. First off, they need to be calibrated quite often. CO2 sensors are really good at drifting. So if you're using a CO2 controller in your grow and you've never calibrated it, there's a good chance that you're going to need to do that. Because what happens with most CO2 sensors, and that's a wide range, because a lot of CO2 sensors don't even use CO2 sensors. They use VOC sensors and kind of like guess what the CO2 might be based on that. So the really low tier stuff isn't even using a CO2 sensor, because actual CO2 sensors are kind of expensive. That's why the Pro is a bit more than the one. That CO2 sensor inside of there is not just any old CO2 sensor. It's a dual channel CO2 sensor, which pretty much what that means is it keeps us stable inside. So it keeps it zero quite well compared to most sensors. If you're using a single channel CO2 sensor, you're going to have to calibrate them very often, because what happens with CO2 sensors that are not dual channel is that over time, if they're in a constantly enriched environment, most places aren't constantly enriched, right? Like a grow room is. But if you leave a CO2 sensor in a constantly enriched environment, it will its idea of zero will start to drift up. And I had this experience before even Pulse had CO2 sensors, and I didn't even know it. And what was happening in my room was I had a burner, and it would just never come on. And I was like, why isn't this burner not coming, like, ever turning on? It's saying I'm always like 1500 CO2 in this room. I'm like, this is not even possible. And I couldn't figure it out. Well, it was because that CO2, it was an older controller that I was using. Its drift had gotten so high that it was just assuming that it was 1,000 in the room at all times, and then the burner was never coming on. No one had ever once in my 10 years of growing ever told me to calibrate a CO2 sensor. So I always kind of harp on that, because it's not something that I didn't even know, the particularities of CO2 and how the CO2 sensors work. So if you've got something either tracking CO2 or controlling CO2 in your room, take a look at what their calibration instructions are, because you might want to do it.
That makes total sense. And it's cool because once I get, once they arrived here and you do the first calibration, I learned, okay, outside, during noon is going to have this kind of relative CO2, and that's going to kind of give you the break. But for the first time ever, I can kind of see the things jump when I'm in there watering. You can kind of see, okay, we're in here when we wake up in the morning and we're down outside of the lung room. You can see the CO2 kind of rise. And so clearly the next thing that it's pushing me to, I'm like, okay, what does a sealed system look like? Do I get into CO2? And I think it is one of the next major jumps that we want to start to experiment with now that I'm kind of at least comfortable with what's happening in just a normal home grow without adding anything, which is living in the space and this and that. And I know it's not necessary, and we get a lot of comments of, you got more than enough just visiting your room every day and this and that. And that's true. The results we've had are amazing. But my mind's wondering of what's going to happen when we do push it up to that 1,500 or, 1,200 and start supplementing with CO2. So that was the first kind of finding I had. And now I think before the end of the year, we'll end up jumping into some type of CO2 in one of these rooms.
Nice. Sounds fun.
So the next one I have is a conversation that I feel like you guys have sparked so much online And it's a term that to me was not even on my radar until, like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe under that probably. And that's VPD. The first time I heard about it, I was overwhelmed, right? Vapor pressure deficit, is that what it is? Can you take us through a little run of VPD? And can you tell me the actual importances behind it? Because, again, like I said, the internet is using this term a lot. A lot of people are emphasizing behind it. So for anyone who hasn't heard about it, or even those who have, give us a little lay of the land of VPD and its importance.
Sure. And much like you, I was a bit of a skeptic myself when we were first diving into the topic. I didn't understand what it meant. It kind of seemed buzzwordy. I didn't really know what significance was, and really kind of a difficult concept to digest. And even for myself, when we were first talking about it, now obviously I have a little bit more experience of it, and it really does make sense. And the best way to really think about it is like a car. Your plant is a car. And we are doing so many things. Your plant's a race car, and we're tuning that race car in so many different ways, from the engine to the type of fuel we put in to different ways you're arranging the car, like aerodynamics in terms of like training the plant. So there's a lot of different manipulations that are going on to maximize the plant's growth. But there are actual biological processes that happen as well, and you should be feeding those. And in this particular case, we're talking about transpiration, which is the plant's ability to process and exhaust nutrients. And when I say exhaust, it is a bit like an exhaust of your car, right? Engines are tuned specifically for the type of gas that they run, right? And that's a bit kind of an easy way to think about VPD. It's there are specific VPD levels, which is a combination of temperature and humidity, that plants transpire better, right? When it's super dry in a room and you've got an extremely low VPD, cannabis plants transpire well between like 0.8 and 1.5. So once you start leaving those ranges, transpiration is not going to occur, which means you're not processing nutrients, which means you're not growing. And that's just one part of the car. You're talking about the consumption of fuel of the engine, right? That's the tuning of that, right? You've got all these other factors, this gas you put in and all these other factors, but if that one factor is off, which is a huge one, and because it has to do with the processing of nutrients, if you're not allowing transpiration to occur, and that's what the correct VPD dictates, the stomata sizes, are they too open? Are they too closed? Are we exhausting too much, or are we not drinking enough? Is essentially what it is. It dictates how dilated the stomatas are so that the plant can actually drink. And that's the importance of VPD. If your VPD is way low and your stomatas are completely closed because it's trying to retain that moisture, if you got it too dry in there, the plant's not going to want to, it's not going to be passing nutrients through, and you're not going to be, it's not going to be completing its process of processing those sugars, which you might have all the other factors of your grow very good, but if you're not actually processing the nutrients, then you're not getting, just that one piece of it will affect the whole grow. And that's why it is super important. But really, comparing it to exhaust of the car is the best that I can do, because you can tune your engine different ways to process a type of fuel. And if it's not tuned well, then you're going to be either inefficiently pouring it out, or it's not going to be processing it at all.
Gotcha.
So it really is cannabis plant, to summarize, cannabis plant has VPD levels that are advantageous towards the transpiration process. And you want to keep your levels within those VPD levels, but otherwise your plant's not going to be drinking, which means all the other processes are not going to be occurring either.
Gotcha.
So without getting too scientific about it, keeping it from a pure cultivator's perspective, that's what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to keep those nutrients going. You can have the best nutes in the world, but if your VPD is not on point, the plant's not drinking correctly. So it's, a grow is interesting in that you really do have to look at all the different factors, especially on an indoor grow where you're controlling all of them. And you can do that well, or you can do that poorly.
Yeah, it's been cool over the last little bit to see, like, okay, I got a low VPD. I know for sure if I get the temperature up just a little bit, we drop the humidity a touch, and I'll be in that exact range. So is it fair to say that is potentially one of the single-handedly most important metrics that we should be looking to control in our garden is to make sure we're in the optimal range from veg to flower is VPD?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. And that comes, I mean, so VPD really is a calculation of temperature and humidity. So most growers already know that temperature and humidity is the most important thing in their grow. But VPD is the actual, the calculation of, what the plant likes. And, the reason VPD is important is because sometimes you can control some things like the humidity, but maybe your temperature, you can't control the temperature as much. So depending on what you do have control over, you can actually get your VPD in range, just being able to control one of those factors. Like if you can only make your room 80 degrees or whatever, you need to have abnormally lower RH so that VPD stays in the correct range or whatever it might be. So that's kind of how you look at that. So VPD is a magical number based on temperature and humidity. It's a calculation, but it's rooted in science and has to do with the transpiration process and how the plant actually processes the nutrients.
That's awesome. No, I'm grateful that you guys, and then the poster you guys have as well. It's really cool. Just taking it into how simple it really is. Again, just your temperature and your RH and kind of looking at it and basing through it. Anyone listening to this as well or on YouTube, throw down a comment or any questions that you guys might have in specifics to any of the data that we've been going through, any specific questions that you might have for Pulse, because I already have a feeling we might need to do a part 2 on this. This has been already just so much of this stuff is like, okay, I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into this, a little bit deeper into that. I have a lot of part 2 questions to some of this stuff. So if you guys do as well, throw it down. But one of the things I would love to end this with is what's coming in the future as far as new monitors for the hub or new products in general that Pulse may be working on or launching in the near future.
Well, with the addition of the hub, kind of the beauty of it is that we don't have to develop a new piece of hardware every time there's a new sensor we want to support. So as far as hub peripherals are concerned, we'll be releasing 2 or 3 sensors probably every month. And those could be sensors that we already support. For instance, the VWC sensors. We have the Acclimas that we sell, right. But we also support the Terras 12 as well. So with the hub, we really want to encourage choice for the user. They can, if they have one sensor manufacturer that they prefer, they can use that. So we are constantly adding not only new sensor types, but sensor manufacturers to the lineup so that the user can choose which one they want. We recently partnered with Apogee. They do all the PAR sensors. Nice. That you're familiar with. The quantum sensors, the ePARs, are the 2 that we already have supported on the hub. But they have a couple more sensors that we'll be putting on there. We've got TDO and ORP probes, which for the DWC guys are going to be a game changer. TDO is how much oxygen is in your water. ORP is the oxidization reduction potential, which essentially tells you how sterile your water is, so you can avoid things like slime, and if you're running dead res, you can make sure it stays dead res and that your sterility is high in those DWC systems, which can be a huge problem. And then honestly, we're open to suggestions. Wow. The hub can support both SDI and Modbus type communications, so we are almost limitless on the type of sensors that we support. So we, like many other things, we listen to the users, and as they ask for stuff, we start ramping that up. And yeah, as far as the hub goes, that's just going to continue to grow. And then as far as other sensors, I think in the past I don't know if we talked about this publicly or not, but probably at the beginning of next year, I think it's going to be coming out is something that's a little bit more catering towards the home grow guys, which it'll be exciting to hear. It'll pretty much be a rehash of the Pulse 1. We've learned a lot about developing hardware. So it's going to have the same sensor as the Pulse 1, but it will be a lot smaller and it'll be a lot cheaper. That to cater towards smaller operations in international type of things, and that won't be out until about January or so. But it'll be about half the price of the Pulse 1 and very similar functionality. The only thing it won't have the Pulse 1 does have is battery functionality. You won't be able to run it on batteries. It'll just be corded.
Okay.
But it'll be sub $100. It'll have all the same app functions as the Hub, the Pro, and the One does. And then, we're just constantly trying to make it easier and, sticking to our core mission of just protecting as many gardens as possible, which has gotten to, way bigger than I ever imagined. We're all over the world, and it's, trying to keep these accessible at all, because, everyone else, a lot of the solutions can't even buy. But we're constantly trying to just bring that barrier to entry down. And, people, have traditionally thought we're quite expensive. But, for one, making quality products is expensive. And for two, it's not easy to kind of, manage a supply chain for such a small industry, I guess you could say. And as we've gotten better at doing that and grown a bit as a company in our own processes, we've got better at designing products. We've got a stronger supply chain of components and such. And that's how, being that this is a very specialty product, now as we're becoming more mature as a company, we can actually bring those prices down. And that's what we intend to do.
That's awesome, man. No, I got super excited. And for those on the tube and familiar, I think it's Callie Green. He was at an event. You guys were there in person, and that's where I seen a little tease of it. This new monitor that you're talking about for the home growers here launching in January. That one got me very excited, because I know the same thing as myself when I first got into the ecosystem with Pulse. Just with this, it brought up so many questions. It brought up new ways to monitor my data that it just pushed me into a whole new learning curve. I don't know if it was something on your guys' website or some type of statement you guys have, it really pushes you to become a better grower. I can fully say that it really did. And so I'm excited for that to come out, because I feel like it will give a new access point to a lot of the growers or people that are brand new just watching this, or maybe having their first grow for the first time, to kind of give you access to that long scale, what happened throughout your entire grow, and seeing it in an easy way. It's going to be really handy. That one's got me really excited. So where is the best place now to keep up to date with everything that is going to be coming out here in the future? Is it the website, your guys' Instagram? What would be the best spot to check out everything Pulse?
Yeah, our Instagram's is a pretty good spot. That's pretty much where things hit the street first. And then, you can sign up on our website for our mailing list, which will be doing product announcements and things like that. Yeah, and aside from that, we've got a Black Friday sale, which is kind of our annual thing. It's a really good time to get involved in Pulse. So coming up, we'll be doing the Black Friday sale, and that's it's a BOGO. You buy one, get one on the Pulse one. If you buy a Pulse Pro, you get a Pulse one, which would cover your veg and your bloom areas. And then there's going to be a spicy little deal on specifically the VWC kit as well. So if you guys are in the market or you kind of on the fence about it, this is the time of year to kind of take the plunge. Get in on it's the best deal that we ever do. We don't do sales often, but we do Black Friday sale. And it's just pretty much an opportunity for all those holdouts to give it a shot, because although we do have a 30-day money-back guarantee, people are still apprehensive to doing it. I will say, though, nobody takes us up on the 30-day guarantee, because once they get it in there for 24 hours, they love the product. And that's why it's, I don't know if anyone's ever really taken us up on the 30-day thing outside of them just not growing anymore or whatever it might be. So I challenge you guys, if you want to try Pulse out, but you're not completely sold, buy one, install it in your grow, use it, ask us questions. If you don't like it, you email support, we'll send you a return label, and you get a full refund. There's literally nothing more to it. It's as simple as that. Actually risk-free. So give it a shot, and I think you'll like what you see.
That's amazing, Chris. That is something that I got to even reiterate more, too, because you're right. There's a lot of people that are thinking about it, maybe don't know, but the fact that you guys do that risk-free, I don't know any other company that is actually standing behind their product to that degree where they will actually allow you to return it within the 30 days if you're not satisfied. So really cool. And then there it is. You guys heard it here first as far as the Black Friday. That is one of the best times to jump in and to get your hands into something pulse. Again, I'm a big fan of the VWC. As a home grower, I slowly worked my way there, but this is also an amazing place to start as well, to start capturing that data, stuff like CO2, and as well, as I showed in the episode, getting your actual PAR readings and PPFD from each one of your lights as well with this. So it's been a super handy tool. I absolutely love it. I'm definitely was not thinking about sending this thing back to you guys anytime soon, and if anything, I'm really excited for what you guys have coming in the future, Chris. So thank you so much, dude, for coming on here today and sharing some of your insight with us.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me and getting to share the story. We don't get to do that very often, and yeah, it's been great working with you. And as far as a follow-up, maybe when some of these it's closer to harvest time, maybe we can kind of do a follow-up review and see kind of how those conditions have changed from what we looked at today. So we'll definitely keep that.
Great idea. Thanks again, everyone listening. Guys, drop a like, drop a comment down below. And again, any questions that you might have for Chris if we do a part 2 to this, or when we do a part 2, I'll make sure we go through the comments and grab some of these questions. Thank you guys so much for tuning in here to the Home Grow TV podcast, and we'll see you next week.